Welcome to The Good Ride. I'm James Beastie, Davey Boy here. We got two Cougars, a triple Camber, and a Valhalla. I rode this in a wide variety of conditions, everything from some pristine, clean, perfect early winter groomers to some good midwinter powder, and then less than pristine and clean. I often compared it against the Proto Freeride and the Valhalla. These were primarily ridden with Union Atlas, Burton Kendos, Ride Fuse, and Nidecker Rift lace.
Yeah, and I got on this Cougar with my Burton Ion boots and Union Force bindings, and I rode it in the same conditions as Beastie.
I think this 56 Cougar was the right size for me. The Valhalla, I think I'd want to go up a size from 56 to a little bit bigger, but the Proto Freeride in a 160 felt a little too big for me overall. I think I'd want to go down to a 156. The deal breaker was the size 9 boots. It just felt like a little too slow for me.
Yeah, I'm 6'4", 235, got a size 12 boot, and the 161X, I thought this size was a good size for my specs.
And when it comes to shape, this is tapered directional, but not much taper, not that directional. I felt like this was definitely more on the all mountain side, more of the non-tapered side. Even though this is called the Proto Freeride, I felt that way too. It feels almost a little more all mountain. The Proto Freeride and the Cougar are basically almost the same shape. The Valhalla has a different shape. It's a little more tapered, a little more directional. The Cougar has a camber profile that is pretty much like the Hammer, except there are some little passive bends throughout the camber profile, and it leads to a little bit of early rise. The Proto Freeride feels more forgiving. A beginner can get on this and have a time. Same with the Valhalla. The Cougar feels a little bit more on the stable, bordering on semi-locked in type of feel. I would say the Cougar is definitely more for advanced to expert riders and maybe a strong intermediate or two, but in your future there might be some edge catching. The overall on snow feel is very stable, very consistent in all conditions, very easy to 1 foot and flat base with the Cougar, where I felt like the Proto Freeride and Valhalla have just a touch of that auto spinning, but it just tracks a little better than their hybrid rocker boards like Shockwave, Ripsaw, and Rocker and Camber.
Yeah, I thought the on snow feel for this board was definitely locked in. It definitely was stable.
And when it comes to flex, you can see there is a pretty medium stiff flex. It feels a little more medium on snow. It's a little softer in the nose, and there's a little more give in the tail. Compare that to the Valhalla, little stiffer, and you can hear that crack again. Didn't ride it hard enough. Nose is a little softer, tail's pretty stiff with this. And then you have the Proto Freeride. This is a 60, but it has that similar flex. Of all these boards, the Cougar had the best pop by a good bit for me. It was so easy to access this flex. This construction feels more poppy than the Proto Freeride. The Cougar was way more poppy than the Valhalla as well. Something about this new, somewhat lighter, poppier construction combined with that camber profile. I think those little passive bends throughout the camber profile help this load more and really spring more. It wasn't that hard to butter in the nose and tail either, but it does take a little bit of work. The Valhalla might have a stiffer flex, but it was easier to butter.
Yeah, I thought the pop on this board was really good. It definitely took a little bit more work to engage it, but once you did get it flexed, you were very well rewarded into the pop that you got out of it.
And this dynamic flex I thought might be more cranky and more chattery in uneven snow. And it is to a certain extent compared to the Proto Freeride and the Valhalla, but it doesn't have the bounciness that the tip and tail do of the Valhalla and the Proto Freeride because they're off the snow. There's a little bit of clown shoeing, not much. So it kind of evens out, where all Never Summer boards are excellent all-day rides. So when it comes to speed, this thing can point it It has a side cut that seems like it would be more turny than it is, but it's very friendly when it comes to a straight line, especially for a 56. I felt like it was damp enough. Then you throw in the base glide, and I really like Never Summer's bases. I often don't talk about that enough in comparison to, let's say, like Jones and some other boards out there. And they don't really make their bass seem like it's really amazing. It's like a 55 something bass, whatever, but the glide is really good. And when well waxed, these are up there near the top of the top.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is when well waxed, I found the Cougar to kind of drink the wax, and after like 2 or 3 days of riding, it definitely needed a pretty thick layer.
When it comes to edge hold, I felt like this was very competent grip, very comfortable when I hit hard patches and held its edge well. I think this is good with surprise without totally like skidding out and getting weird, but I wouldn't say it's a full-on hard snow specialist. I would say if anything, I felt like I got a little more grip out of the triple camber technology, the Valhalla and the Proto Freeride. I think just all those bends and the way they set in grip a little bit better.
Yeah, I was definitely really stoked on the edge hold on this board. I thought it was very competent, and it definitely held in the harder snow without an issue.
And it doesn't grab in the softer snow either.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd say if anything, the Valhalla and the Proto Freeride grabbed a little more in the softer snow than the Cougar, but it was close. And when it comes to turn initiation, and I would say it's medium to medium fast, but satisfying on good groomers. As you got into powder, it felt more medium, which is kind of the opposite of how it normally works with most boards. The Proto Freeride had a little easier turning experience, and it was more consistent throughout all conditions. And the Valhalla was the easiest, really fast edge to edge. These Cougars, when you set the edge and you engage that side cut, there was a satisfying spring out of the turn and a pretty balanced turning experience. And this was the highlight for me on this board. Feels like a step up from the Hammer, and it's one of the best turning experiences I've had with any Never Summer board in a long time.
I like the turning experience on this board. It definitely drove pretty hard out of a turn. It was down the line, kind of front foot heavy turns for me. I found that it definitely favored the front foot a little more.
I agree with Davey. It really front foot weighted a turn well, but I could front foot, center weight, and back foot weight out of a turn really well with this thing, and all ways you turned it shined, and I love that. In comparison to the Proto Freeride and the Valhalla, they just didn't have the spring out of the turn. That camber between the feet really takes away from the spring out of the turn. They carve well, don't get me wrong. They hold an edge well, they carve well, but the spring out of the turn you got with the Cougar, or the spring out of the turn you'll get with Shockwave or Ripsaw, is a little more dynamic versus the Proto Freeride and the Valhalla for us. And when it comes to powder, in comparison to a lot of other all mountain boards, I felt it was very good, very competent. But in comparison to a lot of freeride boards like the Valhalla, that had just better, easier directional float. In comparison to the Proto Freeride, this did a little better.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of funny too how once you got it in powder, it seemed like it really just wanted to straight line it more than it did on the groomers. And normally you kind of get opposites with, especially with these camber dominant boards.
Like the Valhalla got even more turny and more slashy. The Proto Freeride, even though it's a 160, had an easier turning experience in powder.
Yeah, in powder, I thought this board is pretty down the line and honestly kind of aggressive. It didn't really want to do the playful, slashy type of turns that I like to take on some of the wind-shaped features. It just kind of felt a little more locked in on the camber, and it didn't really want to like roll and slash. It wanted to kind of straight line up it and air out of it. And I think this thing would handle some like powder goalies or straight shoots really well, especially if you're in a situation where you need to go straight and handle a lot of speed going through like a tight powdery corridor, and you're not really hitting wide open faces, getting those really big wide open turns, and you're just keeping it kind of tight in the powder. This is a really good option for that.
I agree. And when it comes to switch riding, yeah, this is tapered, this is directional. The nose and tail definitely feel different, but I could ride this switch pretty well, and I had a lot of fun doing so. Jumps, this thing can just hit any kicker of any type. It really tracks well into the small jumps I hit and lands really well. It has a pretty centered feel for being tapered directional. For jibs, no thanks. But for pipe, Yeah, maybe. And overall, I had a hell of a time on the Cougar. Even though it was a little different in powder, it wanted to straight line more in powder than it wanted to turn, I still had a great time with this. I think you could have a beautiful life with the Cougar as a one-board quiver, but having the Cougar for groomers and shallow pow, and then having something like the Swift would be a great two-board quiver. But I just love this dynamic, poppy, energetic, carvy, springy feel underfoot, and it was a blast to ride it.
Yeah, I agree with what BC just said. I think this board is a really good option for somebody that wants something less directional, a little more centered, that they can still take it through all conditions on the mountain. Big cliff drops, natural wind lips, natural cornices. You could take it off the big jumps in the park. It's gonna be damp enough to where it feels comfortable going at the speed you need to clear a big jump, and it's also gonna be able to absorb your impact when you land bigger airs. And it carves well all around. Swiss Army knife type of snowboard that I would definitely recommend to a lot of people.